I want to make sure it's recorded because if I miss one, I want to be able to go back. So
Yes.
I had self-interest.
Yeah, I do want to say that I think our first session was the information shared by Paul was spectacular. The vulnerability and what you guys shared and how the Holy Spirit, you could see how the Holy Spirit was working in those moments when you weren't sure a baptism was going to happen or it happened, and just the beautiful dress that the Uyghurs shared and stuff. It's just, I really appreciate and thank you all for your openness to sharing.
And I hope you still feel like sharing, because I have a question for everybody when we get to it.
Your turn, Paul. Turning it over to you.
Okay. So last time we talked about baptism, and it's a biggie. But what I'd like to do now is to move on to a different category of sacrament. Those of you who are up to speed on the Book of Common Prayer will be aware that the Book of Common Prayer makes a fundamental distinction between what it calls the great sacraments of the gospel, which are Eucharist and baptism, and what it calls the, I'll quote here, other sacramental rites that evolved in the church, which are means of grace, but are not necessary for all persons in the same way that baptism and Eucharist are. So, true to form, our church makes a distinction between what, most Protestant churches think there are two sacraments and 5 traditional rites. Catholic Church says there are 7 sacraments. Episcopal Church says there are 2 greater sacraments and 7 evolved sacraments, is I guess the best way to put it. And I thought, rather, having started with one of the 2 most fundamental, what we ought to do now is turn to the other 5 before we come back to Eucharist, which is, I suppose, the biggest of them all, and we'll close with that. So I want to start today with the one that I think is probably most removed from all our personal experience in one sense. That's holy orders or ordination. All right. Now, the Book of Common Prayer tells us that ordination, I'll quote again, ordination is the rite in which God gives authority and the grace of the Holy Spirit to those being made bishops, priests, and deacons through prayer and the laying on of hands by bishops. However it's defined, ordination is a very ancient practice. But what I wanted to underscore here is that it's arguably the most divisive of all of the sacraments for the church broadly defined. And to make the case, I want to, if you're ready, Maria, we'll show some pictures now. I want to
Yes. Which picture do you want me to start with?
I want to start with Poussin, the ordination of St. Peter.
Okay. Let me share my screen.
And while she calls it up, I'll just say Poussin was a 17th century French artist who was commissioned by various church officials to make, wrong one, to make, there it is, paintings about the 7 sacraments. And this is his painting for the sacrament of ordination. I can tell you what it is, but I assume, do any of you want to take a guess on what it is? It's a famous scene in the Bible, in the Gospels.
Is that where Jesus said that Peter?
Yes, you got it.
Rock?
Extra points, Carol. This is
I've been in a lot of Bible studies.
This is Poussin's representation of what it might have looked like when Jesus turned to Peter and said, your name is Peter, and upon this rock I will found my church. So this is the scene that Poussin used, and it's in that sense a very Catholic scene, because it shows you the ordination of one of the superheroes of Christianity who's assumed to have by tradition all sorts of very special powers that nobody else possesses. Now I'll show you a kind of Protestant picture of
Well, but I like that. I like there in Catholic Church, we always say he's giving him the keys to the kingdom.
Yes, I could have gone on and said that too. I didn't want to take the time to read the whole passage, but yes, the keys to the kingdom and the rock on which the church is founded.
Yes. And now I think you want this one.
Yeah, this is it. And this is, I think it's fair to say, a very Protestant representation of ordination. It was painted around 1900, and it shows the ordination of, the title is The Ordination of Scottish Elders. So it's a Presbyterian church, and we see the teaching elder ordaining the newly elected elders of the Presbyterian church in this particular case. And the difference being that there's nothing, it's not Jesus who's ordaining them, and it's not the granting of any special power or authority. It's a rank, it's an acknowledgement of their important role, but it doesn't give them any power or authority. All right. So what we have is a real division between those people for whom ordination grants special powers and those for whom ordination merely recognizes their distinction as members of the community. Okay. So how did this evolve? Where did ordination come from? I think the simplest answer, without turning to a religious or theological explanation, is that as the church grew in numbers, as there were more and more members of the church, some individuals came to play recognized roles within the community. They maintained worship space. They managed community resources and distributed them. And they led rites of worship. All right. So eventually the question arose, who can do this? And must they be specially authorized to do so? Can anybody stand up and lead worship? Can anybody manage communion? Can anybody baptize? Or are there special people who have special authority and power to do so? In other words, is there going to be a formal distinction between the clergy and the laity? And what is the nature of that differentiation? With me so far? Everything okay?
Yeah, but when was that debate happening, Paul? Or are you just saying this was over history?
Over centuries. I mean, I think, ordination starts very early, but at what point people said ordination grants special religious authority is much later. All right. Or at least it's much later when the church formally defines it. As a matter of fact, it's not till the High Middle Ages, the 12th century, before the church declares that ordination involves special, what's called sacerdotal authority, which I'll get to in a minute. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Question.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there may be people who believed it earlier, but it only became doctrine in the 11th or 12th century.
I want to just back up to something that Maria said about the keys, and the fact that she has seen a lot of historic paintings, that often you can tell who's who by what they're holding or things that are in the picture. And so Peter is often shown with keys, since he had the keys to the kingdom. And so I just think, that comes obviously. Well, there are a lot of other images that different individuals have that if you see something like a man standing there with keys, probably you're looking at Peter.
Yeah.
I did not know that, Kay. That's so interesting.
Okay,
Also, the ordination of priests, though, and bishops, because goes back
Oh, yes, yeah, ordination has already existed.
Yeah, but,
Just
and the
earlier.
deacons also.
Yes,
Because the deacons, I think, if I recall correctly, came into being whenever the deacons were assigned the responsibility of taking care of people, seeing that the widows and the orphans
yes,
and things like that.
distributing support.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, so,
that's what I meant by managing and distributing
yeah,
resources.
okay.
So prior to like the 1200s though, Paul, like who, because I know they still had Eucharist before then, right?
Of course, yes.
And so who was allowed to make it, to really truly have a Eucharist?
Well, see, that's a debate that's still with us, right? I mean, we talked about this before, or the Eucharist means different things to different people. So, I mean, I think the easy answer is that traditions developed and theory kind of came along behind practice. So, that's so where does let me move on. Where does the word ordination come from? Well, Roman law had the idea that there were groups of people that were orders, or in Latin, ordo. And the word ordo meant a recognized legal body or corporation and its hierarchy. So gradually, the idea developed that the clergy was an order, as the Latin would mean, and that it was a hierarchy and a group of set-aside people. And earliest texts mention ordination already of deacons, some of whom were women. And as the church developed, the Roman practice became to designate certain people as members of what they called holy orders. And those were, of course, bishops, priests, and deacons. All right. And already by about the year 200, we see lots of texts where they talk about the ecclesiastical order. All right.
So I will tell you that growing up, I believe as a Catholic that sacrament was called holy orders.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't mean they're synonyms. I don't mean to.
But no, you said holy orders, and I was like, oh, that's how we got that name. I never knew that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
Ordination to holy orders. So there are lots of orders. Not all of them are holy.
Yeah.
Okay. Concurrently with the emergence of the idea of ordination, there became to be rites associated with it. That is, the formal ordination of people, the recognizing them as having this special authority to perform rites and sacraments, became a regular practice. And of course, the symbolic action that's most associated with this is the laying on of hands. Right? You're all familiar with the laying on of hands. And that's very old. That's already in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses ordained Joshua by laying hands on him. This is Deuteronomy 34:9. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. So this idea that laying the hands on could grant a special authority or power is very much older than Christianity itself. In the New Testament, of course, Christ laid his hands on many people. He performed miracles. He cured people by touching them. And so the practice of laying on of the hands is one of the earliest practices we know of Christians. And we see it in the book of Acts. You remember, this is Acts 17. Then Peter and John placed their hands on them and they received the Holy Spirit. So already this practice of laying out of the hands, granting power and authority. But for a long time, there was confusion about what exactly is being accomplished by ordination. Is it simply recognizing people, or is it giving them some special power and authority? By the High Middle Ages, the Western Church had come to the conclusion that ordination within apostolic succession was a sacrament that imparted sacerdotal authority. And does everybody know what I mean by sacerdotal, or should I explain that?
Please explain.
Sacerdotal authority is priestly authority. That is, it comes from the Latin word for sacerdos, which is priest. And it means that there are some people that stand between the laity and God, and they perform certain acts that the laity must perform in order to be in proper relationship with God. Most obviously, the Eucharist, certainly for Maria, and for most of you, many of you, I presume, it's not really communion unless it's performed by somebody with the authority to do so. And that authority is what we call sacerdotal authority. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Interesting.
Now, the Reformation, of course, reopened all these debates, as you can well imagine. And the difference between the Protestants and the Catholics on this remains to this day. In the Catholic and Orthodox churches, ordination designates a special group of leaders who have sacerdotal authority. They can perform things that other people can't do. And most obviously, they can administer the sacraments of baptism and the sacrament of Holy Communion.
The only thing with the baptism,
Yeah,
anybody
emergency.
can baptize. Yeah,
Yeah,
anybody can baptize anybody.
You can if it's an emergency. At least
Well, but
you can.
but that's still
Yeah, you're
it's
absolutely
still-
right, Karen.
it is still it's still a baptism.
Yes,
so-
absolutely, yeah.
So, but emergency or not, I mean, and I find that interesting. So
Yeah. But I don't think even an emergency that a non priest can administer communion. Do you know, Maria?
no, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
I
think.
don't think so either. That
any
is the
case,
reason. That is the reason I have said in the Episcopal Church they have altar guild, because somebody's got to be there for sure. Because you have to have in the Episcopal Church, you have to have one other person. In the Roman Church, I believe they can consecrate without somebody else being there. But in the Episcopal Church, you have to have one other person. I was on altar guild one time in a small church, and sometimes I was the other person.
Any
So-
case,
But
go ahead.
Paul, you said in the Roman and Orthodox churches, but
Yeah.
doesn't that include where's Episcopal lie? Because I thought they
Well,
also.
this is a continuing debate, and Episcopals. You want to remember that the Episcopal communion is worldwide, and there are literally dozens of different variations of the Anglican tradition. So it's kind of hard to generalize. You remember the priest well, you weren't there, but the visiting priest we had on Sunday talked about how she grew up in a low church
Yes.
Episcopal tradition,
Mhm.
as opposed to others who grew up in high church Episcopal traditions. And I was kind of, well, anyway, we won't pursue that now. I don't
I
wanna go-
always think of us as being a Catholic Protestant church.
Yeah,
It
so is there debate about who can perform the Eucharist, the Eucharist in the Episcopal Church? That's what I was.
I think, I don't know, there's debate, there's certainly difference of opinion. I mean, yeah, I don't want, this becomes a very complicated issue, and I can't speak with any authority on it.
Okay,
But it's my impression that there's a diversity of opinion within the tradition about how restricted clerical authority is, or how limited it is. In any case, the important difference is, basic Protestantism is the priesthood of all believers. We're all priests, as opposed to the kind of high church tradition of there are some priests are ordained and they have priestly authority. Okay. Now, this has been further disputed, complicated in the 20th century because of disputes about whether women can be ordained. As I'm sure you know, some churches will ordain women and others won't. Actually, Nancy, maybe you can, I was told that the first time St. Luke's had a woman priest, that a number of people left. Is that correct?
I believe that some people left.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also believe that that some people were attracted to that and came.
Oh, of course. But I just mean that
Yes.
it's one of those things that there is a
Well,
firm difference of opinion.
Not that long ago, I heard about someone's personal struggle with receiving communion from our current priest
Because
and
of, yeah,
because of her gender.
yes, yeah.
And that person was able to reach peace with that, and all is well.
Yeah. Well, this is not, it's not like the 16th century. We're not killing each other over these things anymore.
Yeah.
But it is, we all know that, and the issue of, and it isn't just the Episcopal Church, all denominations should be torn apart about women and gay, our LGBT, I get the, is it LGBT? I can't even, anyway, gays, you know what, I don't even know what the proper term is anymore, but never mind.
I was gonna say, it keeps expanding.
Yeah, just let's agree we know what I was trying to say.
We know what you mean. It's all as well.
Yeah. Anyway, what I want to point out is that, what I want to do now is have you talk about something where you've been ordained. And of course, none of you, I think I'm probably the only one here who's been religiously ordained. Well, Kay has, I know. But, what I want to point out is that there are lots of ordinations, non-religious, non-sacerdotal, but there are even some of you, I'm sure, belong to a non-ordained order. So let's start looking at our pictures, Maria, if you can again. And I would like the cross first.
Okay.
Are any of you members of the Daughters of the King?
I am,
Good.
and I am ordained. Not ordained, but it is an order. It is a religious order.
That's exactly what I want to get at is this is a good example of non-sacerdotal authority.
Yeah.
You've been.
We do take vows.
Yes. And it's an order, and it's
but
a
it's
religious order, but it's not a priestly order.
No, it's not.
No. But I just want to give you an example of even within the church, there are various levels of ordination. Okay, but there are others that some of you have done. Let's give me West Point.
I wondered where that picture came from.
This is not obviously ordination in the religious sense, but it is the moment where there's a sacrament, there's a rite that's performed where graduates of West Point become officers and swear an oath to preserve and defend the Constitution. And this is that moment at West Point graduation. And they are being inducted into the order of the officer corps. Okay. Next, give me the white coat. White coat ceremony. Some of you may have had a son or a daughter. I don't know. Are any of us doctors or pharmacists or nurses?
No, but our daughter Riley went through a white coat ceremony.
That's exactly. This is about as classic a kind of ordination as you can imagine. And when you start medical school or medical training of some kind, almost always there's a ceremony where you put on a white coat for this time, which symbolizes your membership in this exclusive group.
Okay.
And it's a big moment. It's a big moment if you've been working for through your early 20s to get into medical school. putting on that white coat, you know you've made it. You're a member of the club now. One that I've been through. Give me the hooding. All
Mhm.
right. Oh, we've got two of them. Okay. Both from UT. I thought that was nice. This is the ceremony when you get your PhD. You don't just go to graduation and get a diploma, but they have a little ceremony and they put a hood over your head. And I having been through it myself, it's great fun. It was really my mother was there and she was just pleased as punch. And, it didn't mean anything at one level, but at another level, and by golly, I'm almost 30 and at long last I'm a grown up, but you're a member of a club now. All right, and the last one is one where it does consider. Somebody's got their.
Nope,
Can I?
Can everybody mute?
Can I talk now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Okay. The last one is a very important one. It really does convey a definite. Show me the court. This one, yeah. This is a very important moment in the lives of these young lawyers. That's the Chief Justice of the United States. And this is the ceremony where they are called to the bar at the Supreme Court. They pass law school, they pass the bar exam, and then they pass a special exam again before they're admitted to the bar of the Supreme Court. And we still have that bar symbolically, even at St. Luke's, we've got a bar that separates the laity from that's where we all go kneel, is the bar. And on one side of the bar, if it's a courtroom, on one side is the judge and the lawyers and the witnesses and the jury. On the other side are the regular people. And sometimes it's just a skill set. If you'll show me the magnifying glass. I think some occupations have their own little symbols. This is one for me. I worked for many years as a photo engraver. And I still remember the day my dad gave me my own glass, he said, "Here, Paul, you're going to need this." And I put that in my pocket, and it really did symbolize I was a working engraver now in a way that nothing else would have. So what I wanted to do now, we've got about 25 minutes left, is to ask each of you. Oh, I should mention one other thing. Or maybe I'll just, what I want to do is go around now and ask each of you to think about a time when you've been inducted into some order and what it felt like. Did it make you feel like you were a member of something you hadn't been a member of before? Did it grant you any authority? Was it necessary? I should mention one thing. Kay and I, at least, I think probably Kay and I are the only ones who are ordained deacons and elders. Am I right? Or anybody else an ordained deacon or elder? But of course, we're ordained deacons and elders in the Presbyterian Church, which means absolutely nothing in our church here. We're just regular old people here. But we have had ordination ceremonies, and hands have been laid on our shoulders to mark that entrance into the presbytery. But I'm assuming every one of you has been. Oh, go ahead, Kay. You got to turn on your.
One of the things.
Nope.
Kay, you've got your mic off.
One of the things that struck me was a picture of West Point and thinking about how some people had an issue with having communion, the Eucharist with our current priest.
Senate officers.
The fact that some of the people at West Point were wearing skirts, that was a big deal for many people. And one of the people in Congress is somebody who I think was the first woman to go to the Citadel.
Yeah.
And that was a huge issue, so that it's not just the church that has had an issue, or churches, denominations that have had an issue with women in ordination, but the military has certainly had a lot of discussion. And for that matter, doctors, the white coat ceremony was showing a woman who, it also could have been a pharmacist or somebody else. It didn't have to necessarily be a doctor, but now I understand that the majority of medical students are women. And that's, you know, when I graduated from high school, which was way back, there were a couple of people who wound up being doctors who were women, but they were in the tiny, tiny minority.
It hasn't been that long since A&M was only male only. Because I can remember when the first women started going to A&M. So
Well, anyway, I'd like each of you to think from it, is there some kind of experience you've been through that sort of comes close to a kind of ordination or formal acceptance into a group? Maria, let's start with you.
Sure. I think what came to mind for me was I went to a liberal arts college, and liberal arts has a society called Phi Beta Kappa. It's primarily, you know, GPA based. But the little twist for me was I was in a special program at this liberal arts college, and I did not have to take liberal arts curriculum. I could define my own, course path. Yes, it was an interesting study program that they were experimenting with. And so as such, I did not take a language. And I had to defend my ability to be part of Phi Beta Kappa, given that I didn't have a language skill. And I defended it by the fact that I was a computer science major and I had learned multiple programming languages.
Yes.
And so the Phi Beta Kappa it was very elite thing. So it was pretty cool. But I think what was the most moving one for me was I got my MBA at night, so I didn't have a hooding ceremony. And going to my daughter's hooding ceremony was very, very special. Very special event.
I can't resist adding that as a faculty member, I was at the school I was at, I was there during the bitter fight about foreign language requirement for Phi Beta Kappa. And not surprisingly, all the foreign language departments were absolutely convinced that this was the end of Western civilization if they dropped the language requirement. But eventually the math department prevailed, and they did accept arithmetic as a foreign language.
Well, good, because I'm computer.
for some people, math is a foreign language.
Jan, do you have any experience like that? Turn on your mic.
I guess the first thing I could think of is the swearing in ceremony as an officer coming out of ROTC. That was kind of I guess, a quasi special thing.
Yeah.
I think my in-laws were happier than my parents. I'm not sure. Anyway, that was you know, the start of I guess my career out of college.
Awesome.
I was going to say too that it's a good example because the commissioning ceremony is required. You can't be an officer if you haven't taken the oath to preserve and defend the Constitution.
Right.
And so in that sense, it's not simply an empty gesture or a meaningless ceremony. It has legal consequences.
Absolutely.
I'm just going around how about the Uyghurs? Can you give us some examples? Turn your mic on.
Yep. So, the only thing I can think of in recent history, when the boy was going through Boy Scouts, when I was a scout leader, he and I were both inducted into the Order of the Arrow. So that was fun. You know, you get inducted. It's a campfire ceremony, and they stand you up and put a sash on you, and there's an ordeal and all that kind of stuff. But that would have to be the last thing that I was ordained to.
That's cool.
How about the rest of the family? You got anything? No? Okay.
The only thing that comes to mind for me is, when we were when I was commissioned as a Stephen minister, after having to go through all that.
That's huge, Kim.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Do you take is there an oath or a ceremony or anything, or?
They commissioned us in charge, much like they do the Daughters of the King.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's Kim Coyer, can you give us something?
Yeah, I guess I am a pharmacist, so I did go through UT pharmacy school and been a pharmacist ever since.
Did you have a white coat ceremony, or had they not started that yet?
No, I just, we just had our caps and gowns, and we had our private ceremony, or not private, but a special ceremony for the pharmacy class. Yeah.
You had to be licensed, right? Aren't you? You're a licensed pharmacist?
Yeah. So license, and so that's the next step after getting through the program, and then you have to take the licensing exam to practice, and then you have to keep up with that your whole life. You never stop learning.
Yeah.
My husband was a pharmacist, and the state board is more important than graduating. I mean, you do have to graduate, but that state board exam is tough.
Yeah. And then, like I said, every 3 years we got to renew, and we've got all sorts of extra requirements. I feel like every year they get something new, but still hanging in there.
Good. How about the Phillips? What can you tell us?
My latest ordination was as an advanced chainsaw operator.
Yeah, you get badges and chips and stuff, right?
Yeah, you have to have a task book sign off, and they have to watch all of these different aspects of sawing, and that enables
What? Who does this?
Team Rubicon. It's with my disaster relief work.
Wow, that's cool.
Frankly, I like that people that operate that kind of machinery have to be licensed.
Most of them don't.
Oh,
But
golly, no.
I gotta say that I've seen people who were not licensed and they were dangerous.
Unfortunately, it's not required.
Nancy, how about you?
well, two things come to mind. The pictures of the hooding ceremony. So I have a PhD, and I think that happened to me at some point during my graduation ceremony. President George W. Bush spoke at my PhD graduation, which was really cool, but I don't remember very much of it. But the one I wanted to mention that was impactful at the time was, it just seemed so silly, which it was, but yet it's made a huge difference in my life, and that was my sorority being what's the word? Come on, Maria, what's the word?
Inducted? Oh no! You're
Pledged?
Anyway, we had this
historized.
very interesting ceremony. All of the pledge class members had to wear white dresses. And so there was a whole closet full of all these weird white dresses that we had to wear. So there was a bunch of really silly, strange stuff about it. But looking back, and the whole ceremony, some of it was just, we still cry laughing over some of the things that the officers had to do, like walking in boxes and not turning their back on the people, and just, but at the end of it, we did feel like we were part of something special, and not in an exclusionary way, but some of my very best friends now 40 years later are from that pledge class. And part of what it was going through that ordination, being called to the order of that sorority, being
Yeah.
inducted as members.
Initiation.
You know what?
Initiation.
Initiation. Thank you. And our daughters went through a similar sort of, probably what they thought was a silly ceremony when they were in college to be initiated. But you do make promises and you do say words, and the words are beautiful. They really are. They're poetry. But what really matters is the friendships that are formed, and part of it is promising that you're going to be there for each other. So.
Good. John Cleveland, anything? Can you give us something?
Military induction ceremony. That's one that comes to mind.
You don't forget it, I don't think.
Pardon?
You don't forget it.
No, I don't remember a whole lot about it, other than that I was going to be getting on a bus and driving halfway across the country to start my service. But and then at St. Luke's some years back, we had a class for chaplaincy. I don't remember what the program was even called, but there was a bit of a ceremony, in church.
I think it was Community of Hope.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So
I should say about military, there's a famous, I can't remember who it was. I think it was somebody famous during the Vietnam War who was drafted and went to the draft. You get a summons to come to the ceremony, to the draft board, and they line you up and then you take an oath, and everybody else got on the bus and he just went home. And he was arrested and charged with desertion, and his conviction was reversed because he pointed out that he never took the oath. He'd been there, but he hadn't raised his hand and taken the oath. Therefore, he wasn't in the military. Therefore, he had not deserted. and they had to start rewriting the draft letters to accommodate this new reality of somebody who'd found a loophole in the military system.
Did he go on to become a lawyer, I wonder?
Probably. I somebody reasonably famous, but I have no idea who. It's just a long time ago now. Kim Hall, can you give us something, or maybe she's okay? The Mahaffey's, any possibility? I don't know how to call people who I don't have pictures, so they can.
Hi there.
Hey.
I'm-
Hey, there we are.
Oh, great. So can you give us an example of
I just have one because I never was in the honor society or a sorority. I was a Stephen minister at my previous church. And so, like Nancy suggested, when Kim brought it up, it is a period of time that you go through learning techniques and learning how to work with people. And it was a whole new thing for me because I'd never done anything like that. And I did it for about a year. And then I guess the relationship ended when we left that church. But it was just a whole new thing for me. And we all took it very seriously. There's a small class of us, maybe 6 or 7.
That's awesome.
how about you, Mike?
Well, I went through the Order of the Arrow thing with the Boy Scouts and Tau Beta Pi, which is the engineering version of Phi Beta Kappa. But those were pretty cool. But I remember the one that I probably had the most contact with over the last 50 something years was a group called Alpha Phi Omega, and they were a national service fraternity, not a Greek fraternity. And they ran registration for the university, and they're the people that run the flag at the football games. But we had all kind of service projects at the old Austin State School for different elementary schools, at scout troops, you name it. And so that was probably the one that I probably got the most out of over the periods of time. And then of course I did do the raise my hand after ROTC thing. So
Oh,
one thing I should have mentioned that's so important about a lot of these ceremonies is they're done in front of witnesses. And that certainly, having your parents at graduation or having your parents, your family there when you take the oath of office to be and be inducted in the military. I think that it's that ceremonial function is very real, and just having other people witness your making these promises and accepting these responsibilities is part of the power of the ordination experience. Chris, how about you?
I was in the Community of Hope lay chaplains, and also the Order of St. Luke's the Physician, the healing prayer people.
very cool.
So I've been a part of those groups, but really what comes to mind isn't a big ceremony, but was more, and it's actually, it can be kind of funny, is the crazy things that happened with Ash Wednesday, Ashes on the Go, and the trailer park. Like so you talk about like a priestly duty, but I guess that's out in left field, but that's the one that really got me is when it was like, okay, the deacon can't make it and it's you, because Mother Ann couldn't do it. So there wasn't anyone, and I guess because of the chaplains here, so well, you can do it. And so like, wait, I'm going to go do the disposition of ashes to people. I'm not a priest. And I was like kind of in a panic about it. But Mother Ann, it was like that laying of hands thing you talked about at the beginning, just like sort of prayed for me. And that was enough to give me enough authority, I guess, because I really didn't have much or didn't feel like I had much. But there was no one else, and it was 7 p.m. and this is the working poor, and it's like you either step up and do it or they're not going to get ashes, and that's what they want.
That's wonderful. That's a great example. But,
yeah.
Yeah, but ask Nancy about the time the year before when somebody forgot the ashes and she had to pass ashes off to me in the parking lot of the Chevron in Steiner Ranch because the church office had closed, and everybody probably thought it was a drug deal. And Nancy and I are like, yeah, we're going to tell the cops. No, it's ashes. But okay, that's my story.
That's great.
It's just burnt palms.
Yeah.
Okay, Carol, you're our last one. What have you got for us?
Well, as I've already said, I am a daughter of the King, and it is a order. So we do take vows of prayer and service and evangelism. And the prayer and service for me is really easy. The evangelism, I just have to try to I work towards my behavior being my evangelism. I'm not a vocal type of evangelism, but taking that vow of prayer and service is and it's a lifelong, supposedly, but you can get out of it eventually, just like anybody that takes a vow. But it was very important to me, and I gave a lot of thought to it before I even became a daughter.
Great.
So.
Thank you.
Forgot me.
Oh, okay. I just figured you were a fellow Presbyterian, but go ahead.
Well, there are a couple of things, and one is that I think Paul recognized. I do have a PhD, but I didn't go through the ceremony because I got it remotely, and so he gave me my robe, and when I taught, I had a guy who was the head of the school who always wore his robe at graduation, and I was planning to wear mine the year I retired, but by that time the person who used to wear a robe had left the school, so I didn't show up in my robe, but I kind of missed that opportunity. So I have a robe that's in a box, but I want to do a riff on what Paul was talking about with the ordination. I think for me it was important to be ordained, but in some ways it was even more moving that in our church when the new set of people who were taking the ruling elders would then be ordained, the minister would say, okay, everybody who's ordained, come forward and lay hands. And just a tremendous percent of the people who were sitting in the pews would get up and go forward. And you couldn't necessarily reach anybody who was actually being ordained, but you'd put your hand on the back of the person who was closest to you. And it was
the priesthood of all believers.
yes. And it was a moving ceremony. And I think, one of the things that I was telling somebody the other day, this is a non sequitur about what things look like, but it's kind of related. I said, now everything is so casual that when I go out to eat, I want to try to make sure I don't get too dressed up, because if I do, people will think, well, doesn't she know that you shouldn't get dressed up anymore? But I think that in our modern society, in some ways, when we're so casual about so many things, that we do miss an aspect of recognition and ceremony, and that it does have a place. And when Nancy talked about how 40 years later, she still is in touch with her sorority sisters. Well, I wasn't. I went to a school that didn't have sororities. But my sister, boy, the only meaningful thing she does every year is she reunites with her pledge class. And she tells me all about them. And I know where they live. And I know what illnesses they have. And I know whose husbands have died. And it's just amazing. And I just think, wow, clearly it had a huge impact on her. And so I think ceremony and being a part of a group is